Greetings, YouTube. Everyone suffers. Buddhism has been telling us that for a very long time. It is the one universal human trait. And in the process of our suffering, sometimes we learn better lessons, sometimes we don't. The best lessons are, I shouldn't make other people suffer. The worst lessons are, I survived the suffering, so other people can survive it as well. And that is making the world a worse place. It is diminishing our capacity for growth and improvement by not changing the things in the world that caused you to suffer and just expecting everyone else to survive the things that you lived through. This video is partly inspired by my friend Amy and also by one of my viewers who talked about, was I going to address J.K. Rowling's transphobia? And there's no denying that J.K. Rowling had a rough go of it when it came to writing and trying to work through her first book as a single mother. Absolutely difficult to do. But in the process, she created a world that, to me at least, having listened to the first book, I didn't read it, I listened to it on audio tape, and watched the films, lacks a sense of realism because it doesn't address the suffering of the Harry Potter universe. I know you're going to say, well, oh, they did X, Y, and Z. You're right, but it doesn't take on the classism that it's rampant throughout the book. It doesn't take on the utter lack of any addressing the sexuality of the characters. There are no characters in there that have to deal with venereal diseases or pregnancy or being gay or being trans or anything else like that. There are hints here and there, but it's not addressed to the degree that other issues are concerned. And you may say, oh, it's metaphor. You know, it is metaphor. I get that. But it doesn't mean you can ignore the fabric of reality by hand-waving the wand of metaphor at me. And I hear constantly in discussions of racism and of bigotry and all varieties, I get the, well, I turned out okay. I get that a lot when I discuss child abuse, of hitting kids. And if you're hitting a kid, you're abusing a kid. The criteria I use for whether it is good or not to hit a kid is pretty simple. Ask yourself a question. Can my child process reason? Can they respond to reason? If the answer is yes, my kid can grasp reason, then you use reason. You don't hit your kid. And if your answer to that question is no, my kid is too young, they don't grasp a reason. Reason doesn't make any sense to them yet. They're below that threshold. Whatever that threshold is, it'll vary from person to person. Then don't hit your kid because they don't understand why you're hitting them. You're just hurting them for no reason. So don't hit your kid. So if you look at that process I just described, there's never a reason to hit your kid. You either use reason or you find another way around the problem because the kid doesn't understand reason. Hitting the kid is not the answer. And when I hear people say, well, I turned out just fine, well, no, you didn't. Because if you suffered as a child and you've grown up to believe that more children should suffer, you didn't turn out okay. And even the most stringent white nationalist out there has suffered at some point in their life, and they've grown up to make the decision that other people should suffer. They may be aiming that at people that don't look like them, so they're able to abstract that in their heads pretty easy. Well, I'm not black, or I'm not brown, or I'm not Asian. And the misogynist, well, I'm not a woman, I don't have to put up with that. That's how I watched my father treat women, or that's how I watched my grandmother treat black people. They perpetuated suffering. And if you learned at their knee, you have my sympathy, my empathy, because I've been there. I learned at my father's knee about racism, about how to hate everybody. He hated black people and brown people and Asian people. He hated gay people. Trans was not a concept that was in his universe at that point in life, nor mine. I had not really ever met anyone that I knew was trans. Thankfully, by the time I did meet people that told me they were trans, I had cast aside a great deal of that programming. So it was very easy for me to accept, okay, you're trans, cool. I'll support you in that endeavor. And I never found myself caught in the biological essentialism that J.K. Rowling seems to adhere to, which is just another way of masking your bigotry. I mean, if you're a TERF, you're a bigot. And I don't care how important you think you are in the literary world, or how many books you sold, or how many lives you've impacted, because not all that impact has been good. You have presented a world that doesn't reflect the lived experiences of the people that are reading it. It marginalizes them, punches down at them. I understand that the detective novels that she's written are even more overt in both their racism and their transphobia. Even going so far as to threaten a trans woman and saying that, if she doesn't cooperate, that the main character will call the police and she won't do well in prison as a pre-op. Yeah, that's pretty damn ugly. Or describing certain multiracial people in a aren't they wonderfully exotic manner, and then denigrating others for their racial characteristics that differ from the main character. It's interesting that Rowling wrote books where the main characters are white dudes. And while Hermione Granger is an incredibly good female character, her world is very white. Go take a look at the Harry Potter movies. How many people of color are in there? How many female heroes are there? How many gay characters or trans characters even exist, let alone are portrayed in a positive light? She's perpetuating suffering. Maybe not the suffering that she lived through, but suffering nonetheless. Because generations in the future are going to be reading those books, and they're not going to see themselves. Or they're going to read things that make them feel lesser because they're trans or they're not white. She's tried to retcon some of the aspects of the Harry Potter universe, but dollar late, day short. Sorry, just not going to happen. You can retcon it all you want. When you launch that book, you didn't do it in the best light. You didn't be supportive. You weren't supportive of the people that are going to read those books. And yes, those books are going to be affecting people for generations. I know a guy from the D&D news group, and it goes by CWASP. Rick Spoor is his real name, S-P-O-O-R, and he is an author. Does pretty well in the fantasy genre. He commented to me once that the world was ready for a Harry Potter book. And if Rowling hadn't done it, someone else would have. It could have even been science fiction, but they were ready for that story arc to exist. And she just was the one that won the lottery. I think there's a lot to be said for that. That the time was right for that. And so she succeeded. And now she's a billionaire. A billionaire that writes novels that make other people suffer. That posts tweets that hurt people. People she's never met, she'll never meet, and she's just spreading suffering. I understand she suffered. I know what it's like to see someone who's a single parent trying to raise kids. I've been in that place. I was one of those kids. My wife was one of those kids. We know what that's like. I know lots of people that know what that's like. That it doesn't mean you get to grow up and be an adult and make other people suffer because you suffered. Whether it's bigotry because of your color or your gender or your class or anything else, spreading suffering isn't helping. And Rowling is spreading suffering. Rowling is presenting a world that doesn't reflect the people out here that are going to read it. And yeah, you can do that in a fantasy setting. You can do it in a sci-fi setting. The most egregious example I can think off the top of my head would probably be Star Trek or Star Wars, both of which have an incredibly unrealistic view of how humans function. It's kind of weird. We're a world where you're going to have elves and orcs or Klingons or Vulcans or mineral aliens or anything else. Doesn't seem to be able to represent humanity in all its variety. And that's sad. That's a reflection of the conservatism of the authors, of their social conservatism, which is something that we need to eradicate, not support, and not echo. So don't make people suffer. It's cruel. You have my sympathy and empathy if you suffered. Don't spread it around. I try not to. I fail, but I try not to. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep wanting to be that better person. It's just hard sometimes. But I don't have the platform that Rowling has. So even on my worst screw up, I'm not hurting as many people as she has with a simple tweet. I should probably either remove or retcon or forget that she did. But the people damaged by it, the people she made suffer, they are never going to